Now, the South African Municipal Workers Union holding its virtual meeting as well and highlighting some of the challenges that they are looking at as far as municipalities are concerned and the deviation from the collective bargaining agreements that are in place. And then we also heard from the mayor of the Midvaal as far as how he is handling this pandemic and some of the contradictions as far as, for example, businesses that are operating in that municipality. Now, with COVID-19 pandemic and the accompanying lockdown, there's a significant risk that millions already in poverty will fall into destitution. Millions more currently in work will be driven into poverty and will be unable to meet their basic needs. Economic interventions must therefore aim to support households and communities as well as protect workers and sustain businesses and strengthen the public health intervention and strengthen the economy. This was in an open letter to the president by several economists when the lockdown began in March. Well, with our guest now, Senior Research Fellow at the Trade Collective, Lebohang Pheko, we want to discuss that a little bit more and some of the economic pillars that will support this economy. Lebohang Pheko, good evening and thank you for your time tonight.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm well, I hope you're well too. Looking at the regulations that has been passed during this COVID-19 and its direct impact on the economy of local municipalities. Is there something that government is missing as far as ensuring that these local businesses will be able to recover from this crisis?
So I think there's a blind spot around businesses which are located in rural areas, in the countryside, in townships which are high-density African-based areas and African-based economies in this country to all intents and purposes. There's been very little attempt or very little outward explicit attempt to really reach out to those economies in ways that respond to the times that we're living in. And remember that this comes off the back of historical marginalization, historical segregation. And I'm quite concerned about the notion even of the ways in which sometimes local government demarcations and even the ways in which particular service delivery challenges play themselves out almost reproduce Bantustanish and the kind of the racialized forms of living and infrastructure and redistribution that came before 1994. And what COVID and the COVID moment has illustrated is the existing fragility, the existing vulnerabilities, and many years of neglect or mismatch between government policy and what is actually happening on the ground.
And looking at, how this, for example, lockdown has affected the personal care industry, and if you understand how the township economy works, you know that that is the heart of the economies. The ladies who run salons and who run nail labs and so on and so forth. And looking at the fast food sector as well, how it was impacted. So ladies could not open their chisanyama, or gents could not open their chisanyama. And these are the things that are driving the economy in the township. Is there more that municipalities can do?
Well, I think it's very difficult because the one thing is that remember that there's several million rands which have actually been put aside for municipal economies and for municipal infrastructure at this time. And I think the problem here is the distribution and how to access those funds. And it's not so much only the women entrepreneurs and the other entrepreneurs, you can include the guys the guys who do the barber shops, the chaps with their kippas at the corner, and so on. It's a diverse range. It's small groceries, it's small butcheries, it's different people who run tailors. It's also people who run car dealerships, mechanics, and so on. It's a very important social and economic ecology that takes place in various communities because, of course, of the distance, because of our historic geo-economic spatial planning, which situated African people far away from the sites of the economy. We have very vibrant and to some extent very self-contained local economies, which is back post-1994. The state has done very little to support. And then certainly, even though there's a huge amount that has been put aside, relatively, and maybe huge is the word I should use, but there is an amount which has been put aside for local economies and for local government improvement of infrastructure, as you say. What is very unclear is how that is going to reach local businesses. And I think it's also important that when we think about local government infrastructure and local business, that we need to think of infrastructure not just as buildings and roads and things that are visible. It's not just bricks and mortar. Infrastructure is also to do with, multi-purposing. It's to do with the things that make life easier, more efficient, more and make life livable and make life more smooth. I mean, it's things like Wi-Fi. It is social trust as a form of easing infrastructure. It's things like clean air, clean water, things that we don't necessarily see. So we need to have a very holistic, cross-purpose, multi-purpose approach to whatever we're developing in any community.
Yeah. How are the necessity-driven entrepreneurs going to survive? I'm not talking about those who are opportunity-driven, that, well, there's an opportunity, I can start a business here, let me take advantage of it. There are those who, for example, they cannot be employed at this point. They have been trying to get employment, so they are not driven into entrepreneurship because of opportunity, but they are driven into entrepreneurship because of necessity.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, though. This is a whole different conversation, because I think necessity is also to do with the amount of support, the kind of market base that you're able to attract. And I think we should also draw a line between necessity and sustainability, necessity and survivalism. And I think there's a huge difference between entrepreneurship and survivalism. And we often get into that often lets the state off the hook, because instead of creating an enabling environment for different businesses and for different economic opportunities to thrive, it really does leave it to people to different sectors of society to see to finish by starting some sort of an enterprise. I don't think that it's really fair to force people into entrepreneurship just because of a lack of employment. Not everybody is cut out that way, Thabo. Not everybody is wired that way. And I think that that's becoming a refrain, a constant refrain, that young graduates, that people who have lost their jobs, etc., should just automatically go and start a business. Based on what? What is the feasibility and the success rate of that business? What is the market share that they're going to attract? What is their competitive advantage against over and above all the other people who may be in the same, sector, in the same business, even in the same area, on the same street? I mean, how many hair salons can you have down one street? How many chisanyamas can you have down the same street? So, and I think that that is a whole very important conversation about a lack of viability of the economy in terms of absorbing the skill set that is actually available, and it becomes a bit of a cop-out. And I think also bearing in mind that not every business that not every entrepreneur is going to be a success. And lastly, to say that remember that as African people, even things like startup funds, seed funding, it's not easy to find them, Thabo, because we don't have intergenerational wealth at our disposal for the most part. We don't have, mommy and baby who can pander us a few thousand rands, a few million rands to start risky enterprises. Risk is costly. So I think that's a very important conversation, but I think it's slightly different to the conversation that we need to have right now, which is what do we do to ensure that there is a distribution of sustainability grants and business extension loans to existing businesses.
Yeah, I mean, there is grants, there's some kind of relief that has been made available. Is there something that we need to do at policy level?
Well, I mean, I think let's go back one paragraph. I think the question is made available to whom? Because so far, I have a fairly extensive network of people in businesses and, people who are, entrepreneurs, consultants, engineers, economists, and so on, doctors. Not a single one of them, by the way, has received any relief. So just off the top of my head. So I think, that should influence the policies. Those sorts of, that's a persuasive piece of anecdotal evidence that whatever is happening at policy level isn't being translated into economic output. It's people who are fairly well conversant in policy processes, fairly well conversant in bureaucratic red tape and slicing through red tape, aren't able to access anything. I myself, as a case study, the first day when when the lockdown was announced, I also said, okay, let me just apply for something through my bank. To date, it's really a dololo situation. And I think that if policy is not responsive to that, then it's really not, it's of no use. What's happening on paper versus the experience of people who are trying to, get their hustle on and who are trying to continue to make a contribution to the economy despite these interesting and trying and challenging and exciting times that we're in, then you wonder then what's happening at mass level for the the millions of people across this country who are trying to make an honest living, whether as employees or employers.